tutti, good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana and I would like to welcome back our regular listeners and also welcome any new listeners. Also, be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at Italian Radio Hour and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past video interviews. Vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo, grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming one of the most influential voices in Italian American studies, Anthony Julian Tamburri. A scholar, educator, administrator, and a cultural advocate, Anthony has dedicated decades of work to elevating Italian and Italian American literature, cinema, language, and identity on the national and international stage. He is Distinguished Professor and Dean Emeritus of the John D. Calandra Italian American Institute at Queen's College, CUNY, an institution that has grown tremendously under his leadership. His scholarship spans more than 20 books, numerous edited volumes, and hundreds of essays on subjects ranging from semiotics to cinema, diaspora identity, and language politics. Anthony is also known for his work as a public intellectual, producing interviews, public programs, and cultural conversations that bridge academia and the broader Italian American community. Today, we'll explore his latest book, Gli Americani Italiani, Cultura e Società, a fascinating work written entirely in Italian that pushes us to rethink what we mean by Italian identity in today's global, multilingual, and multicultural context. And of course, knowing Anthony, we can expect not only deep insights, but also wonderful stories, vivid memories, and reflections on the past, present, and future of our community. So don't go anywhere, ma prima pubblicità. Parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring in person or online to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at istitutomondoitaliano.org. Anthony, it's a true honor to have you here. Welcome to the Italian Radio Hour and welcome back. Did you just recently come back from Italy?
I did 2 days ago, yes.
And where did you go this one time?
So I was in Rome and in Campobasso. The trip was basically to be part of a conference in Campobasso at the University of Molise celebrating the 100th anniversary of the birth of Jose Rimanelli, who was from a small town near Campobasso called Casa Calenda, and who came to the United States in 1960 after having already published 4 or 5 books in Italy and spent the rest of his life basically in North America. Yeah. So it was wonderful.
I can imagine. Molise is one of my favorite regions to discover for so many unique little things, including the Museum of the Bagpipes that it's in the middle of nowhere but has so much history. But Anthony, before we dive into the big ideas, I'd love for listeners to get to know the person behind the scholar. So what are some of your earliest memories growing up Italian American that shaped your curiosity about identity and culture? And your experience, you're from Stamford, Connecticut. So
Right.
your background, even the dialect that you were exposed to as a child, has a different flavor from some of the experiences that I have heard of people that might be, I don't know, from New York or New Jersey. So please take it away.
So you're right. The dialect that, well, on my mother's side, the dialect that we heard was really a Franco-Provenzale dialect from southern Italy, oddly, right? One would expect it to be from northern Italy, and instead it was from southern Italy in northern Puglia, sort of northwest of Foggia. It's in the province of Foggia. And then on my father's
Where my
side,
family's from.
yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah, Foggia e Trinitapoli. So what is the actual town that you're referring to?
Baeto.
Okay, I will have to look it up. Okay, sorry for the interruption.
So that was my mother's side. On my father's side, instead, is from Lazio. It's from the Ciociaria, and then more specifically, the Valle di Comino, and
Okay.
the town was called Sette Frati. And there, of course, it was a dialect. It was a dialect and mostly standard Italian we heard on that side, and it was totally different from my mother's side. So we grew up listening to these 2 different languages and trying to figure out where the similarities were. But we really couldn't. We spoke English basically. Italian was the language of secrets for the adults, as was often the case. And I started studying Italian in school. We knew some words as kids, but nothing really great. And it wasn't really. I started studying first Latin, then Italian, and then I lived in Italy for a while, whatever, and then yeah. So that's my background sort of linguistically. But here's the thing, and I was talking about this actually yesterday with some friends. We didn't grow up as Italian Americans. We grew up as Italians, right? So we thought we were Italian. And it wasn't until we sort of left the neighborhood, and it wasn't really until I was a freshman in college. I had to take I was in a teacher ed program. And so we had a lot of courses we had to take, and one of them was sociology. And it wasn't until then that when the prof got to ethnicity, he talked about Italian Americans. And for a moment, there was a moment where I thought, who are they? But I realized he was talking about us. And I said, wait a second, we're Italian. We're not Italian American. So that always sort of stuck a little bit. And my degrees are in Italian studies. For many years, I taught Italian. I taught Italian language and literature, whatever. And then at a certain point in the late 80s, I was sort of pulled into Italian American studies. And so we've spoken, I and others have spoken about this idea of identity. Who are we, right? And so I've over the last couple of decades, I've questioned sort of the use of Italian American versus Italian and things of that sort. And I'm looking into then the literature, mostly the literature, not so much the cinema, but the literature of Italians, quote unquote, that is Italian Americans made
Mhm,
in the United States. You realize that there's a whole history of writing in Italian in the United States.
mhm,
So now who are these writers? Because the Italian literary establishment says, well, you're not really part of the Italian canon, you know.
mhm,
And it's been a pretty much a conversation that we've had
mhm,
since the early 90s. And so the book you mentioned, Gli Italiani Americani, Cultura e Società, there are 8 essays that span really 30, almost 35 years of my writing on this. And little by little, it comes, what the reader will come to the realization that I've gone from Italian American to Italian, which includes everybody. It includes
mhm,
those in Italy. It includes those here who are of Italian origin, whether they were born here, whether they came here as a young child or as an adult, and also the so-called 80 to 88 million Italo-discendenti that there are in the world, right?
mhm,
So I think so my feeling right now, as I've sort of rethought things over the last 20 years, is that maybe we need to take hold of this adjective Italian and really spread the definition. And I think that Italy, the sort of collective consciousness in Italy at the level of the government, et cetera, are rethinking this as well. Do you know,
mhm,
just the whole idea of Italia, that the movement to um, the Italians call it roots tourism, il turismo delle
mhm,
radici. I like
mhm,
to call it il viaggio alle radici, right?
sì,
But
mhm,
just this whole idea of wanting Italian descendants to rediscover Italy, etc. I think unintentionally they're redefining, they're assisting us in redefining the adjective
mhm. Yeah.
Italian.
Yeah, and what is interesting, it's I think there is a little bit of disconnect between what the Department of Tourism might do in Italy and trying to bridge the experience here in the U.S. Like I've been, so to speak, in this area for playing for the last 20 25 years. And when I first came to Pittsburgh from Rome, there's always been a huge pride in introducing someone would introduce themselves as Italian, and then we dive a little bit into the conversation, second, third, fourth generation. So I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing this question at you. Um, other cultures have been better at keeping the language. And it's not that they came for a more privileged background. So what happened? Because there is this huge pride of being Italian and this seeking the Italian citizenship, like the gold passport,
Right.
is a testament to it. Let's not talk about the citizenship laws that are going on right now, but so there
That's
is
for
this
another
huge
program.
it's not, it's a different, yes. So
Yeah.
there's this huge pride, a sense of pride, certain traditions kept at home, but then culturally, there is a little bit of a gap. So do you have any and personal opinion why the Italians have not been able to maintain the language? And I know it was the secret language, but
Yeah.
we have the Greeks, we have the Chinese that have their more than the festivals, the schools, and so.
So I think part of it stems to back to the immigrant generation and the first generation Italian Americans, right? So there was always this idea that you needed to be accepted as an American, and so you would tell your children, we speak not to speak Italian outside the household, even though they spoke Italian within the household. And actually, they didn't really speak standard Italian. They
Mhm,
spoke a dialect of some sort, or they spoke a type of pidgin Italian that eventually, over the decades, as their parents got older, would be American, would be contaminated, quote unquote, by Americanisms and things of that sort, right? So you would have, instead of, going to the, I don't know, pizzeria or whatever, you go to the grosseria, right? Yeah. And
mhm,
of course, in Italian, you hear grosseria and it just sort of, right, rattles your brain.
mhm,
And that was part of it. I think another part has to do with just the way Italians were treated at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. When you look at some of the writings that were done by the quote unquote Americans, some of the sociologists, some of the cultural observers, Italians were always were often, not always, were often um, uh, considered uh, dirty, stinky, violent. The men were violent. The women were totally submissive. They lived in 10 people in a one-bedroom apartment, things of that sort. We see that a lot with Jacob Riis, for example,
mhm,
right? And then I think what might have capped it all off was World War II. And at a certain point in 1940, 41, at a certain point you start seeing in public buildings in the United States, don't speak the enemy's language. And you
mhm,
had that famous poster that we often see of Hitler, Tojo, and Mussolini, and in each language it was bisogna distruggere la democrazia, we have to destroy democracy, or something to that effect, right? And so I think that really pushed more the notion of Americanization, and I would
mhm,
say assimilation and not
mhm,
acculturation. So I
mhm,
think those are the three sort of points that,
mhm,
unfortunately, the other thing is, of course, we're at, as you said before, we're at the fifth generation, more or less. And so we're so far from the immigrant generation. And let me just say, there's a real uncanniness about this because in the 19th century, before the great wave of emigration from Italy, Italian was a cultural language.
We had the intellectuals coming
Exactly.
also to South America, the Ligurians, the
Exactly.
Piedmontese, and so forth.
And the other thing was, and I always point to this, and I forget where I learned this, but between the United States and England, in the 19th century, there were over 80 translations into English of the Divina Commedia. Why do we need 80 translations? So it really demonstrates an interest in Italian culture, right? And in
Mhm,
Dante and whatever. Yet, unfortunately, Italian somehow became an immigrant language. It lost
mhm,
its culture for some reason, right? And it becomes an immigrant language. And that's, I think, That's a good part of it. And I also, one of the things I think that can help it, and this is where I think you're a model of this, is that the Italians who come over here as an adult, 20, 25, 30, they really need not to stay locked up in their little communities of Italians, right? So and I was happy to see this evolution in ISNAF. You know ISNAF, the
Mhm.
Italian,
Yeah.
but it's Italian Students and Scholars of North America Foundation, right? So when I first, well, 20 years ago, when I first came to know about them, they were Italian. You had to sort of be an Italian born and educated person to be part of that. But they've evolved. They've
Mhm.
opened up, I've noticed. And
Yeah.
I think that's very good. And that's where I think this the new immigration from Italy to North America to the United States can be really productive in that
Mhm.
sense. And so it's work that's got to be done on both parts. The
Mhm.
Italians need to chat more with Italian Americans, and the Italian Americans need to open
Mhm.
themselves up and be willing to learn the language and so on and so forth. I tell people all the time, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can only always learn a language. The difference between a kid and an adult is that the adult doesn't want to make mistakes. Whereas the kid doesn't care, right? And I say to them, just let your ego go and
Yeah.
make the mistake. And you're going to make a funny mistake, and it's going to be, and we're going to laugh at it, whatever, but make the mistake.
Oh, believe me, I have both one from my students and one from my end. So we had Rai, the Italian TV, coming
Yeah.
to Istituto Mondo Italiano to do an interview. And they wanted a short 60-second video. So we had a class going on, students of mine, and we had an opera singer. So they didn't really know what I was up to. I just had the cell phone on, so I'm starting to record. The opera singer starts with this nice, introduction, and then I was actually asking the students what do you like about learning Italian here, and one student said because our teacher put us at aglio instead, which means garlic instead of aglio. And then he was a lawyer, very famous lawyer, and another classmate was that they laughed and everything is getting recorded. So I sent this to Rai and it's still on the website. We're still
Yeah.
laughing about.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's I really appreciate what you just said because I guess the effort has to come from both directions with a lot of curiosity. That's I think it's going to be the winning the driving force, not judgmental. But what we see here is again some of the traditions that maybe we don't do in the big cities, but as soon as we go into the small towns, it's like seeing our grandparents or great
Yeah.
grandparents doing that. Why wouldn't you be interested? Why wouldn't you feel affection for that? But on the other hand, it's not about just food traditions.
Right.
Dante, the being able to kind of. My mom was waking us up with singing opera. Not that she was an opera singer, but we grew up with certain. So it has to be. I think if we united in this journey together, we can achieve better
Yeah.
results. I personally was one of those Italians that came here. Again, you come, nowadays we don't even call it immigration. It's like it's the professionals living overseas. It's
Right.
just we come by choice. But is it really a choice? I mean, yes, it's a better job opportunity. Maybe in Italy you wouldn't be starving because you had already a good life, but you're still reaching out for that
Yeah.
golden apple. So maybe in a having a plan B that our immigrants, our ancestors,
Yeah.
um,
So, and the other thing is this, and I've spoken to the people of the various organizations about this, the leaders in the various organizations. What we hear from we won't mention names, we'll just say the various organizations. And I'm a member of two of the big three. So the different the in all their mission statement is the promotion of the culture and language, right? Italian culture and language. Yeah, they they in some ways they don't realize that that requires certain work on their part, not just money, although they can give more money to the promotion of Italian language and culture. They can give more money to MA students who want to teach Italian, right? And just do the typical, okay, we'll give you whatever, however much it is for you to do your MA at whatever university, and you just have to give us 3 to 5 years that you're going to teach Italian. And then afterwards, you do what you want. These are some of the things in which they have to engage, I think. Um, and we don't see that a lot. And then the other thing that we need to do, as far as those of us who are in the positions to do so, is we sometimes need to pick up the phone in our local cities and call the superintendent, call the Board of Education, the local Board of Education, say, well, why isn't Italian being taught? Italian is just as important a language as any other language, et cetera, et cetera. And we have to let go of that mentality that we're not a useful language. Italian's a useful language. And especially in the big cities. There are still in New York City, and it's true, we have the largest number, I realize that, but there are still about 300,000 to 400,000 people in the five boroughs of New York who use Italian on a daily basis. It's
Mhm.
their daily way of communicating. And so, and Italian actually in New York City and in New York State is one of the 6 to 8 official languages. So whenever we get in 2008, it was Mayor Bloomberg who did it. In 2010, it was Governor Andrew Cuomo. So when we get mailings from the city or from the state, it always has a sheet that says, information is also available in the following languages. Call this number. And there's Italian, se avete
Mhm.
bisogno, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
So we just have to be much more proactive in that
Mhm.
way. And it's gotten better over the years, but
Mhm.
I still think we have a long way to go.
Yeah. I mean, it just on one hand, yes, more educational philanthropy. And definitely the money is always needed, and then the offering and offering a language. It's almost a catch-22 because a school is still a business. They're going to offer
Right,
what people are going to sign up to
right,
your school versus the other.
right,
But I studied an Italian program here in Pittsburgh where it was never taught. And when I left, because of all the other commitments that I have to take care of, the students are still, in touch with me. And the school is now, okay, let's put back Spanish. And I felt like, okay, so we paved the way. The consulate was also behind us. And all of a sudden, it was easier to just go back to
right.
and so unless you offer it, it's never you start offering, and the students will be there to fill
And
those
that's
classrooms, and they don't want
yeah.
to take a risk because
And
they're a business but not entrepreneurs. Let's
right.
put it that
And
way.
that's where again, um, influence from the community comes into play, right?
Mhm,
Because, um, okay, to fund a teacher full time is anywhere from 50 to 80 to $90,000. That's a lot of money. However, an organization can say to a school system, look, we'll sponsor 1 or 2 courses in Italian. And the deal is that if the enrollment remains, then you pick it up after 3 years.
mhm,
These are things that when I was at Purdue University, for example, Japan, it was called the Japan Foundation. It was sponsored by the Japanese government. We hired 2 people, 2 assistant professors that way. They gave the first 3 years salary and they said, okay, if things hold, then you have to pick it up and move forward. And now there's graduate studies, or at least when I left, there were graduate studies in Japanese. And so these are the things we have to look at, whether it's on the high school, whether it's a K through 12, usually it's junior high or high school, or whether it's on the college level. I mean, I just think that we have to be more creative in, because because if someone goes to blank elite university and they're paying 80 and $90,000 a year, and an association gives them 5,000, it the impact is minimal of that 5,000. But if an organization says to a school, we'll sponsor an Italian course, here's $5,000 for someone to come and teach that course. We, however, we'll do it for 2 or 3 years, and then you pick it up if the enrollment stays, right?
Mhm.
Those are the things. We have to be more imaginative, more creative, I think, in our thinking when we deal with these things.
And also looking at language as a forma mentis, not just, I mean, sometimes people really feel it like it's a foreign world, like some fluff that they cannot
Right.
conceptualize and put. My personal background, I've been in high tech and in amazing technological world where I was able to shoot up that ladder in my career because of my language skills, in addition to what they were looking for. I got transferred to Belgium with a pioneer team to set up the first European headquarters of the first business that was in the B2B world. And here in Pittsburgh, the hiring requirements were extremely high, extremely high. In Brussels, even more. We want that plus at least three languages. Otherwise, those engineers, those developers, they were useless to us.
Right.
So, and then Fiat buys Chrysler. Here in Pittsburgh, we have an amazing it's the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center who invested and created a state-of-the-art transplant facility in Sicily. So it's not just we think about Italy and, just going to teaching, which is a profession I'm in, so I highly
Right.
respect it. But the additional money making jobs, unfortunately, there is not much money in education. We know that. But we
Yeah.
need to shift also the importance of the foreign language also in a high tech and research environment.
Yeah.
So you have in your career, you jumped a lot, East Coast, West Coast, here and there. We always take for granted that maybe someone that came from an Italian American household will eventually develop a passion for this field. But that is not always the case. So I was wondering if there was a book, a teacher, or an experience that at some point when you were at the choosing your field of study said, this is really what I want to do, that brought you to the Italian American world and the Italian studies.
Right. So I knew in high school that I wanted to teach Italian, believe it or not. I thought I wanted to teach in high school. And I knew that for me to keep a job, I had to have a master's degree. And myself and Paolo Giordano, who one of my dearest friends who just passed
He
away,
just passed
unfortunately.
away, unfortunately.
So Paolo and I, so Paolo came from Bordighera at like 10 years old, 9, 10 years old to Stamford, Connecticut. And then we became friends when we were in high school together. And then we went to the same college. We went to what was then Southern Connecticut State College, which is now Southern Connecticut State University. But I always knew I wanted to teach high school. But I also knew that for me to keep my job, I had to get an MA. And Middlebury College appeared, and I saw that they had a 12-month MA. And the
Mhm.
idea of quote unquote getting it out of the way was attractive, right? So I thought, okay, let me see if I can do the Middlebury program and I can get out of the way and come back at a job. I'll never have to go to school again. Well, so so both Paolo and I applied. We got accepted, and we went to Italy. Went on the MA program, and I remember I befriended some young. At that time, there were only assistenti, right? There was the cattedratico, the ordinario, the one professor who had the title of professor, and the others were assistenti. And so I befriended a couple of them who were 2 or 3 years older than me. They were, neo-laureati. They just graduated. There was only the laurea at that time. There was maybe, I think there might have been the perfezionamento, right? Sort of professional development after your degree, but there was no doctorate in Italy at that point. The laurea was the doctorate. So I befriended some of these guys and I remember I had this epiphany somewhere in late fall, early winter, where I was studying and I have all my books around me, whatever. And I thought, I can do this for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
And
I'm glad that you did.
it was at that point that I applied for doctoral programs.
Mhm.
And I applied to 3 places, got accepted, and then went to who gave me money.
So, how, in your opinion, has the field of Italian American Studies, how has it evolved since you first
The Italian
started?
American Studies has, so uh, we've always talked in terms of 4 major names.
Mhm.
Um, Olga Peragallo,
Mhm.
who died unfortunately at a young age in 1949, but she's doing a thesis. It was going to be a type of encyclopedia type work on Italian American writers. And she's doing that actually under Giuseppe Prezzolini at what was then the Casa Italiana of Columbia University. She's one. The other person is Rose Basile Green, late 60s, early 70s. Then in the early 80s, 1981, Robert Viscusi wrote this really important essay called De Vulgari Eloquentia, Italian American Fiction. We have I think it was, anyway, the subtitle was Italian American Fiction, had Italian American fiction in it. And it was, and then there was Helen Barlini, who did the Dream Book. So those are the 4 names that I think those are the people whose shoulders we stand on from a literary and cultural point of view, right? Then they're the sociologists, and that's a different field. So, but look, we're going from 49 to 74 to 81 to 85, right? And um and Rose Basile Green wrote the first book on Italian American literature, the Italian American novel, documentation of an interaction between 2 cultures in 1974. And we really had to wait until 1996 to get another substantial study, a book. And that was Fred Gardefe's Italian Science, American Streets, The
Mhm.
Evolution of Italian American Narrative. Since then, however, things have exploded. And it's been really fun to see all of these books that are being published. Fred Gardefe runs a series with SUNY Press called Italian American Culture. It was a
Mhm.
series that it was serendipity. It was a series that was born um, out of him just by happenstance meeting the assistant director of who was then the assistant director of SUNY Press, because I had just had a manuscript accepted for a book, but they didn't know where to put it. They hadn't decided where to put it. And so Fred and I went to meet the SUNY Press people at the Modern Language Association. And I introduced myself as, because I hadn't met the guy we had just written. And Fred, in his inimitable way, says, "So how come there's no series in Italian American Studies?" Well, that assistant director put him in touch with the then director of the press. And 2 hours later, Fred comes back and says, "We got a series and your book is the first book." And so since then, I don't know, there have been like 30 or 40 books in Fred's series since 1997. That was 1997. So, things have grown. I direct a series with Fairleigh Dickinson University Press entitled Italian Studies, in which we do Italian American Studies. We've done at least 3 or 4 books in the last 5 years on Italian American Studies. So things have grown a lot. And then our own press that Paolo Giordano, Fred Gardefe, and I founded in 1990 when we founded the
Mhm.
journal Via, we published probably about 300 volumes, mostly creative works,
Mhm.
some scholarly work. And the happy thing here with regard to Bordighera Press is that it is now an official entity of the Calandra Institute. So it's going to live on. It's going to
Hmm.
live on. There will always be a desire for for authors to publish. And yeah, it'll live on beyond us. So that was a good thing. Yeah.
So actually, that makes me think about, the challenges that an Italian American author might face to being published. Um, and then obviously there are some very successful writers, Adriana Trigiani, she's really championing good conversations about
Right.
Italian American identity. So I think Bordighera Press is doing a wonderful job trying to give a chance to those who might have get way too many rejection letters.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, maybe some of the obstacles that were facing the Italian American authors, whether it was a new genre or they just.
So so there were two. So we started out publishing a journal called Via Voices in Italian Americana. And then we decided to publish books because um, we didn't want to publish a 14-page poem in the journal. We thought that it might get lost. And so what we did was we did the proverbial chapbook, which is the under 48 pages of poetry, right? A chapbook. And it was only about, in all, front matter, back matter, 25, 30 pages. And that was the beginning. Then we saw that there was a desire for other people who wanted to publish, especially poets at that time. Italian American poetry was considered, especially if it was imbued with Italian American thematics, went back to immigration, etc., was seen to be too quote unquote ethnic, as one Italian American writer once said, who
Mhm.
pulled out of our anthology. I'll get to that story. So um, we were lucky in the sense that I was at Purdue University, and Purdue had and still has a quote unquote printing service, but it was really like a printing press. They were already advanced, whatever. And so we could get books published at a very inexpensive cost. And so we decided, okay, we'll do a book or two, whatever. So we started with a collection of essays that Paolo Giordano had edited on Joseph Tusiani. So back in 1994, the first book was a chapbook by Robert Viscusi, the oration on the second death of Christopher Columbus. So it was a 14-page poem. Amazing. And he used to actually perform it on the piano. So that was that. Then we did this other book. Paolo Giordano put together this 390-page book collection of essays by various authors on the entire work, or most of the work, of Joseph Tusiani, work in English, work in Italian, work in Gargano dialect, and also his work in Latin, because Tusiani was, of course, um, yeah, our 20th century Dante in certain ways, right, for Italian American literature. And I'm happy to say that the next 4 or 5 books, two of the next subsequent 4 or 5 books got people tenure. And we were delighted.
That is
We
amazing.
were delighted. One book had been praised by a university press, but the author was young, and the evaluator actually said, if this were someone like Umberto Eco, and I would recommend publishing it, but nobody knows this author. And then I think it was number 6 or 7 we published was in Italian. That was a big step for us. We
Mhm.
published it in Italian by a professor who was living in Australia, and she got tenure as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then Helen Barlini came to us with a book called Chiaroscuro,
Mhm.
collection of essays, and the first edition she published with us, and then she published an expanded edition about a year and a half later with Wisconsin. So we started there, and one of the things we would hear, especially by those, not so much the poets, but by the prose writers, the novelists or the short story writers who came to us, they would often hear, well, if this had just a little bit of organized crime in it, it might be we might really consider this. And so, we just felt that, okay, we can afford to do this, boom, we'll do it, And because we liked the book, whatever, we felt we can afford to do a book, we did it. We would do 2 or 3 books a year. Now we do about 15 a year. We had great support then from Purdue. We have great support now from Queens College and CUNY, the Calandra Institute. And so, as I said, it's now an official entity of the Calandra Institute, and it's there. And the other thing we were happy about is we now have established authors coming to us,
Mhm.
which is really nice.
It's
You know,
now you get to pick.
and so Anna Monardo, who years ago published The Courtyard of Dreams, it was reviewed in all the main, venues, etc. Um, Came to us with an autobiographical memoir, which we published. Then she asked if we would republish The Courtyard of Dreams, which we did. We are happy to do, and there are other writers. We've published a series of Italian writers, some living, some not living. Most recently, we've published the last 3 or 4 novels, or we would call them novellas or novels by Elena Khan, for example. So, it's been very satisfying. And it just shows that there are many more good writers out there than we can publish. And like you said, Adriana Trajani is great. And among she and Lisa's Scotoline or Scotoline, right? Depending on that. The both are they're friends too. They're friends, and they've been very supportive of young writers. Adriana's been great. She's a good friend of the Institute. We had her on a couple of months ago on Italics, and actually this morning I think it re-aired.
It was a wonderful,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So we had a nice chat with her, and that's what we need, though. We need someone like an Adriana Trajani, um, to help young writers to talk about what it means to be an Italian American writer. I mean, what she has done with her Facebook program, it's all gratis. She nobody's paying her to do that.
yeah.
She's doing it on her own, right?
He's
Uh,
fully vested in this. Yeah.
it's really a question. It's really a wonderful example of giving back, of giving
Mhm.
back. And this latest book of hers, The View from Lake Como, the tour
The-
she did, I don't know if you saw, if she got
No, I
a
heard
chance
about it.
to.
You actually attended. There is some sort of a performance.
Yeah, it's
So
wonderful. We
it's
saw it. We saw it
mhm.
in Staten Island. It was just great. She was great. She does this wonderful stand-up act about her family. And while it's particular to her family, it's universal to
Mhm.
most Italian American families and
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, talking about what this might be maybe a little to read the list. So in order to a young American, because now there is a lot of emphasis on the young Italian
Yeah.
Americans to continue to dig a little deeper. There might be some that might dive into the history, which obviously that would be ideal. And the literature. Would you have, if you had to recommend 3 or 5 books to start with, because you know that once you start reading something, it's kind of you're just triggering something.
Yeah.
Eventually, it's going to do its own work. But a starting point for someone who's going to listen to this interview, I said, let me take these names down. Let me take
Okay.
these books down. And I will do the same because I'm Italian, but I'm missing the Italian American. So it's totally
Yeah.
selfish, this question.
So, so I think so. 3 books come to mind. Pietro di Donato's Christ in Concrete,
Yes.
1939.
Mhm.
Um, Mario Puzo's The Fortunate Pilgrim,
Mhm.
which I think is probably not one of the best Italian American, one of the best American novels of mid 20th century. Mario Puzo is really a good writer. He was a really good writer. And I
Mhm.
think his first 3 novels, Dark Arena, The Fortunate Pilgrim, and The Godfather, were really well written.
Yeah.
And then he got caught up, unfortunately, in the fame, etc. And
And I think The Godfather was more like my family's starving. I'm gonna write something that
yeah,
I know is gonna work.
Yeah. And
Which
then
is
the
a
third,
masterpiece. We don't want to, but it was a choice of a different genre.
I think so. I
It
think yeah,
was a strategic literature choice.
right. And then because both um, Dark Green and The Fortunate Pilgrim got wonderful reviews, but of course they didn't sell that well. And so, right, The Godfather was then the book, as he himself said, that he thought was going to make him more money. And indeed, back then he got whatever he got, 400,000 dollars for the rights for the movie, et cetera, right? So he made out. The third book is Helen Barlini's Umbertina. And I think that I think and in all three books we get um we witness the immigrant experience um and sort of nicely we we also see the female perspective. So also in Puzo. And probably Puzo is the nice sort of linchpin for both going back to Fortunate to Christ in Concrete and moving forward, I think, to Helen Barlini, because there's both Lucia Santa, the mother, who has a whole, very difficult life with one husband who dies, another one who is the sort of stereotypical violent male, whatever, and has a daughter who is very much progressive in her thinking for that time, who's Octavia, and who wants to make sure that her younger brothers go to college, go to school, stay in school, whatever. And so those are the three novels I think that are really are a place where to start.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if I were to reverse the question, what are three books that Italians living in Italy should be reading to start their journey to understand more about the Italian American experience? Would you still stay with these three choices? I would also obviously add Gli Americani, Italiani, Cultura e Società because understand.
So I would say that Christ in Concrete has been translated over the years three times, and
Mhm,
it's so hard to translate just because of what Pietro di Donato does. Pietro di Donato, in a good deal of the book, is actually using sort of Italian syntax with American words. He does some wonderful things there. And I think at the beginning, when we go back to look at some of the reviews from 1939, we find some people praising him and some people not praising him.
mhm,
But yet they're praising someone like Joyce for the same thing that Di Donato's doing.
mhm,
And I wrote about this in an essay. And so yeah, so that's um so Di Donato's hard to read in Italian. Um the first two translations I don't think were done that well. There's a third translation I haven't seen yet. Helen Barlini's been translated. I think it might still be in print by a press called Avagliano Press. And Puzo, of course, has been translated. I think it's called, I think it's called Mamma Lucia.
mhm,
The Italian title is because her name is Lucia Santa, so it's called Mamma Lucia, I think, in
mhm.
Italian. Yeah, so he's been translated. Those are good venues, I think, into the history. And then, of course, for the Italian would be the second volume that Francesco Durante published in 2005 called Italo-Americana in 2005. It was the second of two volumes in which he really traces Italian American literature from 1885 to 1942.
Mhm.
And what's uncanny about that book is that about 80% of the 900 plus pages was originally published in Italian. And Italian American, what we call Italian American literature, begins in Italian. And you see the first, I don't know, 20 years, let's say, predominantly Italian. And Rose Basile Green speaks to that as well. She starts with the novels that were written in Italian in her overview of the Italian American novel until 1972.
Okay, we're going to go into a quick break. Then we're going to dive a little bit into cinema, right? Another passion of yours. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Do you love Italian food? Want to learn the secrets of homemade pasta, sauces, and traditional recipes, just like Nana used to make? At Mondo Italiano, our authentic Italian cooking classes bring the taste of Italy right to Pittsburgh. From fresh pasta to regional specialties, every class is a delicious journey through Italy's culinary traditions. Spots fill quickly, so reserve your seat today. Call us at 412-478-2681 or find us online. Mondo Italiano, where Italy comes alive one dish at a time.
Un caffè, per favore. For more than 35 years, Pittsburgh has started its mornings with La Prima Espresso. From freshly roasted beans from around the world to the perfect espresso or cappuccino, every cup is crafted with care. Stop by and enjoy the warmth of our baristas and familiar faces, or bring the taste of Italy home. Order online today at laprima.com. La Prima Espresso, Pittsburgh's coffee. Okay, so we are exploring the many different facets of Italian American identity with Professor Anthony Julian Tamburri. It's been already a very informative conversation, and among the many interests that Anthony has and extensively written about is cinema. Okay, so I was wondering again here if you have seen a shift on the portrayals of the Italian Americans over the years. Are we still stuck in time? I know there is still a lot of work to be done, but the roles are changing a little bit. So give us your perspective on where we stand. Some of maybe the productions that have hit the mark, and someone that, and maybe some that have completely missed the mark in that.
Okay. So it's true that in early United States cinema, the first decade, the first 2 decades, Italians are not well represented. The Italian appears for the first time in a movie called The Skyscrapers of New York, which is a sort of love song to the building of New York City. But there's this little story about a petty thief, and his name that goes up on the placard, the screen goes black and you have the prose, the writing in white. And so when this character who's Italian appears up on the screen in big white letters goes Dago Pete. So the first Italian is considered Dago Pete, the slur that none of us want to hear. And then we have a couple of other things going on where the Italian is disloyal to his friend and tries to steal his girlfriend, and so on and so forth. But there's a wonderful movie that talks about the trials and tribulations in the early part of the 20th century, and it's called The Italian. And it's about basically this Italian immigrant comes over, he and his family, and it's a tragedy of what can befall, the tragedy of what can befall an immigrant family. Hard to get a job, things of that sort. And then, of course, they lose their child. And so it shows those trials and tribulations without denigrating the Italian, number one, and number two, without inserting something about the Black Hand, because at the same time we have the short, The Black Hand, right? So we have that. The two movies that a lot of Italian Americans who critique the early representation of Italians as mafiosi, the two movies that people see as sort of cementing that image of the mafioso is Little Caesar with Edward G. Robinson in 30 and 1931 Scarface with Paul Muni, right? And then of course we sort of have to wait probably until 1943 for a movie called The Purple Heart, which is 1943, the story of four American soldiers in a Japanese prison camp, war camp, right?
Mhm.
And it's made in 1943. It's made during the war. Well, one of the characters, the four characters, is Italian. And he's played by Richard Conti, who, of course, we then go on to know as Barzini in The
Mhm.
Godfather, right? But Richard Conti also played an Italian American writer in the 1950s in a movie called um, Full of Life, which comes from the novel by John Fante.
John Fante.
John
Okay,
Fante,
we'll come back to John Fante. Yes,
major writer, right,
a
who
big
is
writer.
perhaps we need to add to the first three that I
Yes.
had mentioned. So John Fante writes the screenplay. That's really how he sort of, that was his day job. He was a screenplay writer. He wrote the screenplay. It was played by Nicholas, by Richard Conti, and it was directed by Quine. Director's last name was Quine in 1956.
Mhm.
So we're already getting now some positive images of the Italian. 1943 with Angelo, I forget his last name, played by Richard Conti, and now here we have it. And the nice thing about Full of Life is that the main character, Richard Conti, is a writer, very self-referential here, is a writer, and his parents are immigrants who live up, he's in LA, and his parents are immigrants who live up in the country in Sacramento. At that time, Northern California was, of course, very much rural, and outside Sacramento. And so we have some good things that happen, right? Then we have what's called the New Hollywood. And the New Hollywood for me consists of Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Michael Cimino,
Mhm.
and Brian De Palma.
Okay.
Those to me are the four sort of directors of that time. Now, we have
Is
to have a
Savoca there
footnote
too? Somehow, Savoca or
later. Nancy
later?
comes
Okay.
later.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So we have these four directors, but we also have something else going on in the background that people aren't aware of. Ida Lupino is directing a couple of films. She's directing some TV, and of course, she's an actress. And so we have that going on, and only later does Ida Lupino become, the subject of people's studies. So anyway, going back to the New Hollywood, we have these four directors. And two of them, of course, The Godfather, Mean Streets. They've done other things, but they become famous for The Godfather, Mean Streets. But then we have Brian De Palma, who does Carrie, and Michael Cimino, who does The Deer Hunter. And when you think about it, with Coppola and Scorsese doing their thing, Michael Cimino gives us the first Vietnam War movie with The Deer Hunter, 1978. And Brian De Palma gives us more or less the first slasher movie with Carrie, if you remember, if you saw Carrie, right? And in a way, there would be no Scream 1, Scream 2, Scream 3, I would contend, if there weren't Carrie. And so we have that. Then we have those who come later, and that's where we have Nancy Savoca, Penny Marshall. People forget that Penny Marshall, in addition to being, the actor in Fonz Happy Days, was a really productive director, movie director. Of course, the most famous movie, A League of Their Own, where she did the movie about the women's baseball league during World War II. So we have those two, and with both of them, with both Penny Marshall and with Nancy Savoca, they're touching on images that we can say are very Italian American. Penny a little bit indirectly, more indirectly. Nancy Savoca, of course, has three movies that are patently Italian American: True Love, Household Saints, and
Mhm.
then Union Square. And True Love for me is very important. I like the movie, so that's the first thing. I like it.
Mhm.
Second, it's very important. because within the whole thematics of Italian American cinema, that is, movies about Italian Americans, it's probably the first movie that one doesn't have any reference at all to organized crime, and two is from the perspective of the woman. And that's what makes that movie for me so important. And then I just love the movie. I love the way, the whole, the real klutzy young man who has no idea what it means, right, to be in a relationship, whatever. Um, and then of course, Household Saints is a more serious,
Mhm.
in that it deals with the whole religion, superstitions, things of that sort. PTSD and the brother who comes back and becomes an alcoholic. The poor thing. He's obsessed with Asian, what he thinks is Asian culture, whatever. He's got an infatuation for this Asian woman in the neighborhood and stuff. And I think and just the whole idea with religion. Lily Taylor just does a wonderful job as Teresa. And of
Mhm.
course, Vincent D'Onofrio and Tracy Ullman are wonderful as characters. This is not the first movie in which Tracy Ullman plays an Italian American. She did
And
it with
and
Kevin
it's
Kline.
also, yeah, it's also interesting that Nancy's daughter has done a documentary of the making of the movie, so we
Right.
get to hear more about the casting,
Yeah.
the budget, the one street that had to play it all for all the
Yeah.
and the indeed some of Nancy's decisions as far as how to direct the movie. So Anthony, even through this interview, you are clearly a bridge between academia and the community, because you have taken us to so many places during this conversation that are appealing to both worlds. And so you have done, and you're still doing everything possible to make scholarship accessible, community centered. Tell us more about you've been at the Calandra Institute for maybe two, going 3 decades. I don't know. It's
Two. Next year it'll be
between
two.
two.
Next
Okay.
year it'll be 2 decades. It's
Okay.
19
Two
and a half
decades.
years.
Okay.
I actually started, and you'll understand. I actually started August 15th, and I did that
Okay.
on purpose.
When no one else was working, you were
No
the
one else
only
was
one that
working.
showed
I
up,
started the
right?
Calandra Institute. Yeah, I did that on purpose.
Yes.
Sometimes they say, well, sometime in August, I said, let's do August 15th, right? In the month. And people said, okay. And then finally somebody said, but you're beginning on like Feria d'Agosto. I said, yeah, I'm beginning
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
August.
Let's get it on with a good.
So yeah, August 15, 2006.
So, if you can tell us some of the programs that are a staple of the Institute, and maybe if there is something specific that you have introduced that you feel particularly proud of. And
Yeah,
before you mention also John Fante, I think I've watched some sort of Zoom, I don't want to call it symposium, but
yeah,
there were a lot of people that you brought to the audience again, an Italian American writer that from Abruzzo, if I'm not mistaken,
right.
that some of the work. So anyway, take it away. Tell us
So
about the Calandra Institute.
so when I started at the Institute, we had a couple of years of sort of rebuilding. There was a hiatus. There was someone, Peter Vellen was the interim director, and the Institute was going through some changes. He did a good job of keeping it together. And there were already some programming going on. There were public programming, lecture series, a film series in which we show basically documentaries for the most part. Tonight, for example, we're showing a documentary by Peter Miller on Marcella Hazan.
Oh yes, I have interviewed Peter and been fantastic
Yeah,
Marcella
yeah.
herself.
So we do that, and we do book presentations, things of that sort. So that was already there. What I did, in addition to adding some activities that I'll mention, the other thing I did was I tried to Italianize the Institute, right? A couple of people who were working there were already could already speak Italian, were already bilingual. And I just thought we needed to become more connected to Italy.
Mhm.
And because I believe firmly that if you're going to engage profoundly in Italian American studies, you have to be able to access texts in
Mhm.
Italy. You have to be able to understand a little bit about the Risorgimento. You have to understand a little bit about Italy's own economic crisis in 1919, and then you have to understand a little bit about
Mhm.
why fascism came into play. And I just feel that there are certain documents we don't have available in English that maybe, you need to have a reading knowledge at the very least of Italian. So I thought we should Italianize a little bit the Institute in that sense. So one of the so I brought Bordighera Press. We also developed the Calandra imprint, which
Mhm.
are basically for studies, and the Calandra imprints are for studies, and therefore some of the studies research that we do as a group, and we've produced that. We're actually in the process of going through the first set of page proofs of a book on Italian American educators, and so that'll be out in a couple of months probably. And then the other thing is we developed two programs. One is our Italian Diaspora Study Summer Seminar, which we will celebrate 10 years this coming summer, 2026. And it is a professional development seminar for doctoral students, advanced graduate students, and professors. And we've had more or less half and half. No more than 20 people. We spent 3 weeks in Rome. We were in a four-star hotel near Roma Tre University, the
Mhm.
University of Roma Tre. And we do basically 10 to 4, 4 days a week. We eat lunch, breakfast, we spread out. We eat lunch together, so we're basically 10 to 4 together, and 4 days a week for 3 weeks. And from that, our desire and it's they our desires have been satisfied. One, that students will go back and do more work on Italian American studies, which they've done. And number two, that the professors will go back and either set up a course, or within a course they may already be teaching on American history or whatever, they will add a unit on Italian American studies. And we've seen that come to pass. And then the other thing is, and this was again serendipity, where Fred Gardafe met up with some people from Australia and Rome, and they said, let's do a conference. Yeah, let's do a conference, whatever. And so now we've done 5 editions of what we call the Diaspora Italiane. About every other year, we've done a conference in Australia, in the in Calandra, in Genova. We went, then we had COVID. After COVID, we went to Buenos Aires. Then we went back to Genova because the National Immigration Museum
Museum
opened
is
up
there. Mhm.
officially. And now we're not sure where we're going, but we're going to go somewhere at the end of 2026.
Okay.
And we'll have
Well,
that announcement soon.
yeah.
So we've done that, and we've just opened things up. There are a couple of organizations we allow to use our space. The Italian American Writers
Yes.
Association meets once a
Mhm.
month at our place. Last night we inaugurated the a sort of relationship between us and a very new organization called Piace, Progressive Italian American Cultural Events. And the founder is John Avelluto. And so they had their sort of big first meeting, and we talked about another book of mine just for about 20, 30 minutes. And then we had this big meeting with about 30, 40 people were there. It was great. And
Mhm.
it's the beginning of this organization that John wants to eventually turn into a 501(c)(3), and it'll
Mhm.
be for a lot of it will be for creative activity that
Yeah.
goes beyond the traditional things that we see.
Okay, wonderful. Is there a research area that, if you had a kind of a wish list, you would want to encourage young scholars to pursue? It's something that,
I think there's still a lot of work to be done. There are 3 areas. One, Italian American intellectuals, going back going back to 1880, the end of the 19th century. There are a number of names that and into the 20th century that haven't been studied as much as they can. Um, Leonard Covello, Angelo Patri, those are more educators, pedagogues, whatever. Um, Vito Marcantonio, who was more of a congressman than he was an intellectual, but still had written a few things. Carlo Tresca, others, Peter Sammartino, people don't know about. Peter Sammartino founded Fairleigh Dickinson University. And it's
Mm,
called Fairleigh Dickinson because Fairleigh Dickinson gave the land to the university, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole plethora of intellectuals I think they can study. There's that. I think that there's still a lot of work to do in sociology on third and fourth generation. I think there's a lot of work to do in folklore.
mhm.
Um, and um, and um, I think there's definitely psychology is a field that can use a lot of work. There hasn't been much work there. A couple of names that come to mind is Eileen Riotto Sairi, Elizabeth Messina.
Mhm.
Um, there's a famous article that's been republished over the years by Joseph Giordano.
Mhm.
So there's still a lot of there's a lot of fertile ground out there. Yeah, a lot of fertile ground.
I have one last question. So this is more obviously through your platform and your beautiful interviews with Italics, you have interviewed many people. So if you could have dinner with an Italian or Italian American figure from the past, okay, whether it's academic, literally, artistic, or personal,
Uh,
who would you choose, and why? Who maybe you have studied someone that is like a wish I lived when he or she
yeah.
was alive to ask, maybe.
Maybe I'd have to have a couple of people around the table.
Okay.
No, I think, it, and I say this from the experience of having been in informal company with a couple of, major names. Um, I think it would, I think, John Fante comes to mind.
Mhm.
Um, and Rose Basile Green comes to mind. One a creative writer, one an academic writer. I think that because they're the first generation, right? They're the ones who went to college, who decided to, in Fante's case, write about it in a creative way, and in Rose Basile Green's case, to study it. Those are two people I think I would like to, yeah, whom I haven't met. I've been fortunate. I met some.
You have indeed.
We've interviewed with Italics a plethora of, you mentioned Adriana Trigiani. We interviewed him in Mele Crialese back
Mhm.
in 2009 when Nuovo Mondo was presented to the United States as Golden Door. And we
Yeah.
interviewed him for Italics. We interviewed, and someone I know personally, Sandro Veronesi, for example,
Mhm.
one of two Italian writers to win the Strega twice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I've been really fortunate in that way. And I've met, some people of the older generation. When I was at Berkeley in the 70s, every Italian cultural person wanted to come to California. So one of the people I met, and this would be someone really fun to have fun, definitely interesting to have dinner with, is Roberto Rossellini.
Oh, Mamma
I
Mia.
had the privilege of spending part of an evening with him I was a graduate student who had to accompany him from point A to point B. And then I was fortunate enough to have spent 10 weeks in a class. He taught a class on Pasolini, Giorgio Bassani,
Mhm.
with whom I also played tennis.
Oh.
And who was a much better tennis player in his late 50s than I was in my late 20s.
I was just wondering, so if the word spare time is in your vocabulary and if you
It
still
is.
the
Yeah.
okay, because so
Yeah.
Anthony, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your insights and your memories and
My pleasure.
perspectives with us today. Your work continues to shape how we understand the Italian American identity and how we carry into the future. So to our listeners, Anthony's latest book, Gli Americani Italiani, Cultura e Società, is available now, an essential read for anyone interested in culture, migration, and the many ways identity evolves across generations. But unfortunately, our time together is up. And Big Ben ha detto stop, and it's time for us to say arrivederci e alla prossima. We want to thank you for tuning into the program. And if you have any questions or comments, or if you have any topics you would like us to address, please contact us at the Italian Radio Hour at Gmail. We would love to hear from you. And remember, if you or any of your family and friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, subscribe to the Italian Radio Hour on YouTube or where you catch your favorite podcasts. I would like to thank again my guest, Anthony Julian Tamburri, wishing you a happy holiday season. And our sponsors, Istituto Mondo Italiano and La Prima Espresso. E until next time, alla prossima. Ciao, ciao.